exchanges idea, and also this great enthusiasm and participation is contagious, because I mean, more you see, more you want to be part of it. So it's really a great event.
I think this is a very interesting event. You get to see a lot of people that bring very different perspectives, and they look at what you're doing in a critical way, and they look at it probably very differently than what you thought originally, and it's very, very nice to have the exchange.
The symbol is located somewhere over here.
You never know where the innovation is going to come from.
We have specific objectives in Horizon 2020 about focus and pace as well, about the speed of bringing solutions to the market, generating that economic benefit and the growth and the jobs.
The European funding was absolutely essential for this project because it's a groundbreaking project, it's blue sky research, and that would not have been possible without European funding.
We want to include all the kids that normally are excluded, and we want to empower them to become creators instead of just being consumers. And this award allows us to reach more kids. It's a marketing instrument for us.
We're in the second year of a 3-year project, and now is the time to really start thinking about how we take this forward beyond the end of a project in a year's time. You know, do we present it forward commercially? Do we charge people for it? Do we use crowdfunding? Is it a social benefit?
First of all, internet, that's for sure. The Internet of Things, collaboration on internet, working on internet, that's for sure, but also the new frontiers of science. So it's a long list, but I would say all with the same fil rouge, which is European innovation and really leading in the world. The ICT event is great. 6,000 people. You know, more than 5 million people in Twitter follow the event. It's great, it's important because it's the agora where everyone meets, exchanges idea, and also this great enthusiasm and participation is contagious, because I mean, more you see, more you want to be part of it. So it's really a great event.
I think this is a very interesting event. You get to see a lot of people that bring very different perspectives, and they look at what you're doing in a critical way, and they look at it probably very differently than what you thought originally, and it's very, very nice to have the exchange.
The symbol is located somewhere over here.
You never know where the innovation is going to come from.
We have specific objectives in Horizon 2020 about focus and pace as well, about the speed of bringing solutions to the market, generating that economic benefit and the growth and the jobs.
The European funding was absolutely essential for this project because it's a groundbreaking project. It's blue sky research, and that would not have been possible without European funding.
We want to include all the kids that normally are excluded, and we want to empower them to become creators instead of just being consumers. And this award allows us to reach more kids. It's a marketing instrument for us.
We're in the second year of a 3-year project, and now is the time to really start thinking about how we take this forward beyond the end of a project in a year's time. You know, do we present it forward commercially? Do we charge people for it? Do we use crowdfunding? Is it a social benefit?
First of all, internet, that's for sure. The Internet of Things, collaboration on internet, working on internet, that's for sure, but also the new frontiers of science. So it's a long list, but I would say all with the same fil rouge, which is European innovation and really leading in the world. The ICT event is great. 6,000 people. You know, more than 5 million people in Twitter follow the event. It's great, it's important because it's the agora where everyone meets, exchanges ideas, and also this great enthusiasm and participation is contagious because, I mean, more you see, more you want to be part of it. So it's really a great event.
I think this is a very interesting event. You get to see a lot of people that bring very different perspectives, and they look at what you're doing in a critical way, and they look at it probably very differently than what you thought originally, and it's very, very nice to have the exchange.
The symbol is located somewhere over here.
You never know where the innovation is going to come from.
We have specific objectives in Horizon 2020 about focus and pace as well, about the speed of bringing solutions to the market, generating that economic benefit and the growth and the jobs.
The European funding was absolutely essential for this project because it's a groundbreaking project. It's blue sky research, and that would not have been possible without European funding.
We want to include all the kids that normally are excluded, and we want to empower them to become creators instead of just being consumers. And this award allows us to reach more kids. It's a marketing instrument for us.
We're in the second year of a 3-year project, and now is the time to really start thinking about how we take this forward beyond the end of a project in a year's time. You know, do we present it forward commercially? Do we charge people for it? Do we use crowdfunding? Is it a social benefit?
First of all, internet, that's for sure. The Internet of Things, collaboration on internet, working on internet, that's for sure, but also the new frontiers of science. So it's a long list, but I would say all with the same fil rouge, which is European innovation and really leading in the world. The ICT event is great. 6,000 people. You know, more than 5 million people in Twitter follow the event. It's great, it's important because it's the agora where everyone meets, exchanges ideas, and also this great enthusiasm and participation is contagious because, I mean, more you see, more you want to be part of it. So it's really a great event.
I think this is a very interesting event. You get to see a lot of people that bring very different perspectives and they look at what you're doing in a critical way, and they look at it probably very differently than what you thought originally, and it's very, very nice to have the exchange.
The symbol is located somewhere over here.
You never know where the innovation is going to come from.
We have specific objectives in Horizon 2020 about focus and pace as well, about the speed of bringing solutions to the market, generating that economic benefit and the growth and the jobs.
The European funding was absolutely essential for this project because it's a groundbreaking project, it's blue sky research, and that would not have been possible without European funding.
We want to include all the kids that normally are excluded, and we want to empower them to become creators instead of just being consumers. And this award allows us to reach more kids. It's a marketing instrument for us.
We're in the second year of a 3-year project, and now is the time to really start thinking about how we take this forward beyond the end of a project in a year's time. You know, do we present it forward commercially? Do we charge people for it? Do we use crowdfunding? Is it a social benefit?
First of all, internet, that's for sure. The Internet of Things, collaboration on internet, working on internet, that's for sure, but also the new frontiers of science. So it's a long list, but I would say all with the same fil rouge, which is European innovation and really leading in the world. The ICT event is great. 6,000 people. You know, more than 5 million people in Twitter follow the event. It's great, it's important because it's the agora where everyone meets, exchanges ideas, and also this great enthusiasm and participation is contagious because, I mean, more you see, more you want to be part of it. So it's really a great event.
I think this is a very interesting event. You get to see a lot of people that bring very different perspectives and they look at what you're doing in a critical way, and they look at it probably very differently than what you thought originally, and it's very, very nice to have the exchange.
The symbol is located somewhere over here.
You never know where the innovation is going to come from.
We have specific objectives in Horizon 2020 about focus and pace as well, about the speed of bringing solutions to the market, generating that economic benefit and the growth and the jobs.
The European funding was absolutely essential for this project because it's a groundbreaking project, it's blue sky research, and that would not have been possible without European funding.
We want to include all the kids that normally are excluded, and we want to empower them to become creators instead of just being consumers. And this award allows us to reach more kids. It's a marketing instrument for us.
We're in the second year of a 3-year project, and now is the time to really start thinking about how we take this forward beyond the end of a project in a year's time. You know, do we present it forward commercially? Do we charge people for it? Do we use crowdfunding? Is it a social benefit?
First of all, internet, that's for sure. The Internet of Things, collaboration on internet, working on internet, that's for sure, but also the new frontiers of science. So it's a long list, but I would say all with the same fil rouge, which is European innovation and really leading in the world. The ICT event is great. 6,000 people. You know, more than 5 million people in Twitter follow the event. It's great, it's important because it's the agora where everyone meets, exchanges ideas, and also this great enthusiasm and participation is contagious because, I mean, more you see, more you want to be part of it. So it's really a great event.
I think this is a very interesting event. You get to see a lot of people that bring very different perspectives, and they look at what you're doing in a critical way, and they look at it probably very differently than what you thought originally, and it's very, very nice to have the exchange.
The symbol is located somewhere over here.
You never know where the innovation is going to come from.
We have specific objectives in Horizon 2020 about focus and pace as well, about the speed of bringing solutions to the market, generating that economic benefit and the growth and the jobs.
The European funding was absolutely essential for this project because it's a groundbreaking project. It's blue sky.
Thanks for coming. It's quite late, so Oh, that's me. Quite a nice turnout. It's nice if you guys want to come forward as well. That'd be great. So, how do we enable the PowerPoint? Is the question. There we go. Right. So this is a session on diversity and inclusion. My name is Darko MANAKOVSKI. I have a background in sustainability, the UN, and other organizations, and I had the pleasure to be invited by Loretta to moderate this session. So I just wanted to start by saying that I think that everything starts really with just one idea, or the creation of an idea. And ideas give birth to other ideas. Many ideas usually give birth to better solutions. And actually, one idea that I quite like that has become reality is this rainbow panorama that's actually on the top of the art museum in Denmark, done by a very famous artist called Eliasson. What you can do is that when you climb up there, you can actually see the entire city in 360 degrees, but as the panel or the panorama changes, the color through which you see or the lens changes, right? So it's really interesting because it's about having a diverse perception on the same reality, right? It gives you an interesting... That's also interesting. It gives you an interesting idea, it gives you a different feeling and so forth. And this is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. It's about diversity and inclusion in innovation. And yeah, okay, it's on again. So we'll be talking about diversity and innovation in ICT and digital, primarily. And I wanted to start really by talking a little bit about how we really see diversity and inclusion, or what we understand by it. Yes, it's gender, but it's not only about gender. It is about religion, it is about socioeconomic class, it is about sexual orientation, it is about disability, and again, gender is one of the large issues. So this microphone is kind of dying out a bit. So also another issue. So this is what we understand when we say diversity. When we talk about inclusion, especially in innovation and ICT, I think we really think about, digital literacy, equal access to digital services or products, consumption, production, and so forth. Now, before I kind of hand it over to the panel that we've got today, I wanted to talk a little bit about why this is important. And I really wanted to talk about sort of the global scene in terms of sustainability and diversity and inclusion and ICT. So I think the reason why we want to talk about this, what's important, because we've got three sort of main pillars in the fourth industrial revolution today. One is globalization. It's a real thing. It's happening. Another one is machine learning. It's also something that's real and it's happening. It's going to affect everybody in ways that we can't really foresee. And the third one is automation of different industries, which is also going to have an impact on the future of jobs. It's going to formalize inequalities that we've got in our society and so forth. But more importantly, inclusion and diversity in digital and in ICT innovation has to do a lot with sustainability and the Sustainable Development Goals, which are really the foundation of how we want to transform society to really have a sustainable model where tech can actually benefit society and not formalize inequality. So the reason, again, why we're here is because we really want to have an ecosystem that promotes or enables innovation that reflects on the diversity that actually exists in Europe, right? We're a diverse union. I think we should leverage that and really have sort of a Europe that's a leader when it comes to the future of society. So, and this is going very well from the start. So I just wanted to come to the last 3 points here before we head it off to the panel. One, diversity drives innovation. When we sit really in a room and we talk about ideas or shaping ideas that should be innovative, let's say for SMEs and so forth, usually my experience has been that if the people are all from the same group, either socioeconomic or ethnicity, religious and so forth, they don't really share all of the information with each other because they assume that they already have the same information, right? So this is why diversity is important. The second one, diversity must be inclusive. if you have a diverse sort of a group of people that are brainstorming and they're diverse, but there is only one person holding the pen or the marker, and it's not inclusive, then it doesn't really help. And the last one is diversity is really difficult. It comes at a cost, but it shouldn't be something that should stop us. So in Europe, we've got quite a high bar in terms of diversity and inclusion for innovation. How far or how higher can the bar get? So I think we've got a lot to talk about. And first, I wanted to introduce Professor Mari Redmond to discuss or give us some ideas on this topic. Please, Mari.
Thank you.
There's the mic.
Hello. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Darko, and thank you, the European Commission, for inviting me. I would like to talk about diversity in the broad range that Darko has introduced us. I'm just trying to figure out where my slides are. There they are. Yes. So, obviously, gender is a huge issue in technology and in innovation. And if we go and we look at the computer industry, and we go back and we look at Ada Lovelace, who was essentially the first computer programmer ever. When she worked with Charles Babbage, and he had a computational machine, and he felt that was just capable of computing, of calculating things, she was the person who came along and said it had much more potential. So coming from that position, where the first computer programmer was a woman, to looking at where we are today now. So if we look across the world, and we look in particular at the ICT sector, women in leadership roles in technology are way below 20% and around 10 to 15%. So in Europe and in Africa, we're way down to 11%. In North America, it's slightly higher. But if we look at those figures and we look at the gender breakdown that we have in technology companies, we look and we see that in none of those instances, in none of those currently big multinational companies are women they're not near 50%. In fact, Google, I think, is the lowest, with 30% women working in Google. So how did this happen? How did it happen that women are so underrepresented in the technology sector? That's a really, really good question. And there is a lot of different answers to that. But I think in 5 minutes or 7 minutes, I couldn't give you that answer. But innovation is driven by research and by technology, but innovation is also driven in entrepreneurial activity. And there's a really interesting report that comes out every year. It's published by the Global Economic Monitor, which is called the GEM report, and I follow that because I teach creative entrepreneurship. And they give the statistics for women across the world in all the OPEC countries. So if you look at this, Europe is really way behind. Early stage entrepreneurial activity, women are not encouraged, and I believe that is coming from their education. It's coming from the educational sector. So impressive. That's yes. Maybe women should be running. So, you know, in odd places like in Latin America and the Caribbean, the percentage is higher, but there are a lot of different reasons for that. And if you are interested in looking into these statistics, I would recommend looking at these reports. They're online and they're updated and they make fascinating reading every year. So what I wanted to really look at is gender and diversity. And I've just come out of a session on AI, and AI is the new development in technology that everyone's talking about. It's been around for 60 years. But what we're experiencing now is a paradigm shift, where technology was something that we used as a tool, to technology now coming forward and presenting information, collecting information about all of us, and being responsible in some instances of using that information to perhaps influence our lives. So if we look at all the information that's been collected about us every day, everything we do at home in the Internet of Things will be connected in the future. Every single movement that we make will be recorded. Every preference we make, how much energy we consume, every single facet of our lives is being stored somewhere. And if we look at the way that sensors are then put out into the outside world, again, all of that information is being collected about us. And this is the data, these are the classifications that are going into artificial intelligence and being fed in there to influence our lives. So I think one of the really interesting aspects about AI is not really what it can do, but really how it's going to influence what kind of world that we want to live in. What kind of world do we want to live in? And most technologies are driven by commercial gain or commercial activity. They're not driven by, philanthropic or idealistic views. So I think usually that paradigm is the other way around. Let's develop this technology and see what happens. And for any of you who really are interested in the ethics of AI, there's a woman called Kate Crawford, who I recommend that you spend some time looking at. She's in NYU, and she has created a new institute called AI Now. She's also in Microsoft Research. But her main interest is in the bias and the ethics of technology, and how that influences our lives now, and how that will influence our lives. And this, I think, is the really big question that we have to face for technology now. And just an example of this, because this is one of the PhD students that worked with Kate, and she's from the Media Lab in MIT, and she's a woman called Joy Bull-Amwini, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. But she's done some research on facial recognition. And she found that when she used these facial recognition systems, that the statistics for people with dark skin were very poor. So she benchmarked gender and skin type across the three main facial recognition systems. And you can see the results, which are pretty stunning. So if you look at IBM, the discrepancy is in the second column there. It's where the darker females, where there's a 34% misread. So these are the kind of technologies that are being implemented by AI, and they are perhaps making decisions about people. In the session earlier, we talked about someone who was arrested, and they were considered a criminal because of their skin type. These are the kind of flawed technologies that are going into those monitoring systems used by governments. And before I close, because I've only got a few seconds left, I just wanted to share something really small and really significant that's happened to us in Ireland. We have an Irish Research Council. It's very small in terms of the amount of money it gives out, but a feminist has become the director of this, and 5 years ago they introduced gender-neutral, gender-blind applications, and the results have been pretty staggering. So if you look at 2013, 43% of the applicants were women, 35% were granted awards. And if you look at what happened last year, that has gone up to 54%. And that is simply by insisting that gender is removed in references and anything in relation to any research application.
Thank you. So there we have it, a professor from Ireland that for some reason moved to Venice, that I think she can explain to us later why. So there we have it, gender, especially the ethics when it comes to innovation and how, recording every single aspect of our lives absent of an ethical framework will impact our lives, contra how strong ethical regulation, for example, could promote that in an inclusive and diverse manner. Now, I think, so before we go on to the next speaker, I just wanted to say that we have the option to use Slido, which is basically an app where you can ask questions for the panel afterwards. I just wanted to say with raise of hands, how many people want to use it, or should we just pass a mic afterwards? Slido, yes or no? Yes, hands up. No, okay, perfect. That makes everything easier for us, thank you. All right, so the next speaker is Professor Giovanni Pau. He's chair and professor at Sorbonne in Paris. And he is a person that travels actually so much that he hasn't been able to sleep in his own bed properly because he prefers a chair. Professor, please.
Thank you, Darko. Okay, so let's start with the movie. Oops, what happened? This thing. Okay, here it is. Let's start with the movie. Do you recognize this scene?
I'll go up for each.
Who knows the actress?
Because he's a fool.
Most men are Delilah. Nothing you can do about it.
Does anybody knows this actress? Is a 1940 actress. Silence. Okay, I give you a hint. Oh, who? I saw, yes. Who is it? Lamar. Okay, Hedy Lamar. Why is in this session? Well, there is a reason, and the reason is this. 1938. She basically laid down the theory, the practice, and the implementation, what today we call Bluetooth, or frequency hopping, spread spectrum. She gave it as a gift to the US government to win the Nazis. She was ignored because she was an actress, beautiful, female, and she was actually selling bonds to fund the war. So the reason I am, again, beating on the big gender gap is because basically we have been blindsided for many, many years, and this is one of the, to my opinion, one of the hugest example of somebody that was a genius. She invented technology like 40 years beforehand, now 70 years beforehand, because 40 is a little back, and basically was ignored until 1969 when the technology was used in the Cuba crisis. So basically, this is the consequence of being gender blind. One of them, and I have another two people to show. On the left, John Glenn, famous astronaut, that did the first circumnavigation of Earth on space. On the right, you probably is a recent picture of Katherine Johnson. And why is she important? Because when Glenn was gonna fly, she said, I will not fly unless Katherine checks the maths. Why? Because IBM computers at the time were not precise enough to give any number, and she had all the numbers in her mind. So those are just two examples of cases, and there are zillions of them, really zillions of them across history, where we basically have been blind. And the result of this is in this interesting slide that I got from the National Science Foundation in the United States. On the right side, you basically see the population in the United States in percentage, and on the left side, the people that are occupied in science and engineering. That includes technology, hard sciencing, and engineering of any kind. And you can see the imbalance right away. I mean, the population, as you expect, is basically white man, white woman, 31, and they have a pretty balanced population levels. Then on the other side, when you look at those that are employed in scientific fields, basically things are completely different. And this is not enough. I want you to also take a look at this. This I got it from Wired. I'm sorry if the colors probably don't show well, but what the message of this slide is that on average, a woman salary is about $16,000 less in America from the same qualification, same skills, same salary, same position, man counterpart. So why I am insisting on this? Because basically what happened is we started with technology in ICT that was dominated by women and moved slowly with the technology that is dominated by men, mostly white men. And this is actually having consequences not only on the equality of the workforce, but also consequences on what is going to happen as soon as the technology will take over some of our functionalities. And these are the women in the 40s, but what I want to show is this title. This title is something that I came across in Routers a few weeks ago. Basically, Amazon was using an automated tool to do hiring. The automated tool was trained mostly by men, because Amazon has mostly men as engineers. So the result was that the automated tool, the AI tool, was basically only selecting male engineers. And this is one of the risks that we are going to get if we keep going in this direction. What we can do? Well, in my opinion, we need to change the education from the elementary school up to the university. We need to bring role models that have changed in the last several years. Basically, my generation, and I guess the generations before, the role model were scientists or artists or musicians. And now, with no offense for anybody, role models are bloggers or TV stars. So basically, the culture just got thrown out of the society. And that is one of the things that is basically dumbing down our society. And actually, since I speak very fast, I will probably leave a few minutes for somebody else, but I want to close with something that was an amusing picture from the internet. In a world filled with Kardashians, be a Curie.
Right, so this was autonomous at the beginning, but you see what happened. So now I have manual control over it, so, there you go. So thank you, Professor. There we have it. Again, the application of technology can actually have a very negative impact on people. One good example was the way Amazon uses algorithms to actually be exclusive and not inclusive when it comes to hires. Now I think we need to talk a little bit more a different aspect of diversity and inclusion in innovation. And this is more the aspect in terms of disabilities, for example. And the next speaker is Shadi ABOU-ZAHRA. And he is Accessibility Strategy Technology Specialist at the World Wide Web Consortium. Please, Professor.
Thank you. And hello? Thank you, and thank you for making me a professor. I'm not. But thank you. I'll accept that onerous title just for this session. So, yes, as Darko was saying, I'm taking a different angle from the umbrella term of diversity inclusion and looking at it from the angle of disability and accessibility. So, did you know that there are over 1.2 billion people with disabilities on the web, on Earth, right? It's thought to be the world's largest minority, and it's growing. For many reasons. We're all growing in age, hopefully, and as we grow in age, we develop disabilities, we develop age-related functionalities, functional limitations, as people call it, but many of these people are invisible. A lot of the statistics that we've seen, even in this presentation, right, hardly any reference, maybe sometimes reference to race, maybe sometimes reference to age, but disabilities are really outside the picture. And this is something that is quite relevant, because I think there's a very strong relationship between accessibility and innovation, and I want to show some of this. Some of the examples, take for example captioning for people who are hard of hearing, and the increased media that we're using on the internet today, increased numbers of media and streaming and so on. So using captioning is extremely important for people who are hard of hearing. At the same time, if we look at some of the benefits, captions are extremely important for people who are maybe in a loud environment, or if you are in an environment that is quiet, like in this picture in a library where you can't really watch the video with audio. But at the same time, if we're talking about globalization and people with non-native speaking capabilities, being able to actually see the captions and hear, and how that can help people with different languages. So we call these the additional benefits of accessibility. Just something about captioning and hearing aids, by the way. It's said to be the transistor. So the very development of ICT has been developed by Graham Bell to develop hearing aids for his wife. So there we have women, by the way. His wife was growing deaf at the time. So the very invention of computers actually goes back to accessibility. Another example I want to use is voice interaction. Voice interaction has been used by people with disabilities since many, many decades now, to be able to use the computer by voice, for example, when you can't use your arms sufficiently. And today, if we go to the next slide, this is really the normal way of using your phone nearly, or all these devices. It's becoming the new way of HCI, which is great. This mainstreaming aspect, when specialized solutions, we call them assistive technologies, when they become mainstream and become part of everyday life, that reduces the cost and improves the access for people with disabilities. Think of an elevator. Nobody thinks of an elevator as an assistive device, right? It's just how we build houses nowadays. The same with these, when technologies that are for specialized areas, when people recognize the benefit for the rest of society, and it has this economy of scale in implementation. Another example that I want to show is text-to-speech, reading out what's on the computer. And again, this is a technology that has been used for ages by people with different kinds of disabilities, who's been using text-to-speech to read out loud what's on the computer, for example, if you're blind. But not only if you're blind. For example, many people with dyslexia use text-to-speech. For example, when they hear and see the text at the same time, they don't confuse the letters as much. And they improve, actually, in education and in many parts of society. The additional benefits, if we go to the next slide, on text-to-speech, I think we all know, again, that reading books, e-reading, things that are being built into, everybody has a mobile phone, I guess, in this room, and all of you have text-to-speech functionality. You can have your mobile phone read out your emails for you, right in your pocket, right? So this has become, again, a functionality, an example of something that was developed or pushed in an area because people with disabilities needed that in order to interact with society, but at the same time, something that benefits anyone. It's an innovation for all of society. There are also many business benefits, and this has been looked at by different organizations. I won't go into all of this detail, but just to highlight a few. So Microsoft did research by Forrester Research, it was several years ago, looking at why should they do accessibility in their operating systems? Why should they invest in that? And as a business, that's a fair question, right? Why should I invest in this? How much am I going to get out of it? What's the bottom line? Great question. They looked into that, and they found that about 15 to 20% of the population requires these accessibility features, like being able to change the text size on your computer. But they found that up to 57%, so nearly 2/3 of the population benefit from this feature, from making text size larger, from hearing the text and so on. And if you look in the new operating systems, they don't call it accessibility anymore. They call it ease of use, right? It just makes the computer easier to use for everyone. Who wouldn't like that? Many other examples about SAS, a computer company that is actually investing a lot in accessibility for its own internal staff, because the average age of their staff is increasing. So it's something that they've been looking at. The interaction between mobile design, it's the same use case if you can't read the text because you have low vision, or if you can't read the text because you're using it on a small mobile phone, on a small screen. It's essentially the same technology. So there's a lot of overlap here between mobile design, designing websites for mobile, and making them accessible to people with disabilities. And so on. The list goes on and on. I think I talked about people with low language and digital skills. We shouldn't forget that the majority of the populations have not used computers before, are scared of computers. And I don't mean in developing countries. I actually mean also in Europe. There are still many people who don't have the digital literacy that is needed, and they are scared by error messages. Very simple error messages that we get every day and that we maybe ignore. Actually is a barrier for people to be able to use technology. Search engine optimization and yada, yada, yada. I can go on about the business benefits, but still, accessibility does not happen without policy requirements. And this, I think, goes back to the issue, I think a common issue with all aspects of diversity inclusion is, what do we as a society want? How do we as a society see ourselves? I think Darko was asking earlier, diversity is hard. And I'm going to be a bit provocative and say, actually, diversity is not hard. Diversity is the reality. This is what we are, right? But we are actually blocking ourselves from being diverse, and now we're trying to find solutions to be undiverse again. But, you know, diversity is nature. This is who we are. And it's a matter of changing the mindsets much more than the technologies. Thank you.
Thank you, Shadi. Well, thank you for correcting me. I guess it is the nature. Yes, again, we've heard a little bit about what challenges we're facing, why it's important to be diverse. As we just heard, there is a lot of huge groups of society that are sort of formalized to be invisible, right? And this is why inclusion is so important, not only to have a benefit for society and for people that are not really included in innovation or mainstream innovation, but also in terms of added value. It's a huge sector or market, and so forth. Now, I think that going from hearing about what the challenges are, I think the next speaker is going to talk a little bit more about sort of the socioeconomic aspect of diversity and inclusion for innovation, and how can we apply technology to actually have a positive impact in society, that perhaps it's not just about the technology, but it's about how we use it. So please, Professor Gillian Youngs, Professor in Digital and Creative Economics at the Canterbury Church Christ College, please.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to thank Loretta from the Commission for involving me in this panel. We've had some very creative engagements over the years. And just to say something briefly before I start, everything I'm going to present here has come from learning within actual projects in the startup community, and particularly projects hands-on with startup companies in developing their work. So while I'm going to present some perspectives that might seem marginal, they've all been developed in a hands-on applied research way. I'm going to talk a little bit about the innovation ecosystem, a bit about feminist contributions, and method and empowerment. We'll see what I get through in the time scale. I think it is about changing the ecosystem and the way we think about the ecosystem. And I think it is about thinking outside the tech box. As someone who's been involved, linked to Innovate UK, which is the main innovation driver within the UK for the last 10 years, I can assert that definitely the mainstream thinking about innovation is completely within the tech box. I've been involved in research projects located in Brighton, which outside of London, which is an incredible startup ecosystem, is the most creative digital ecosystem, and developed a concept there for Innovate UK called Internet of Place. And this is where I developed this idea of a different way of thinking about the ecosystem, which starts with individuals and communities and starts with a place and interest-based approach, and recognises that a lot of policy settings are things that actually constrain or stimulate and frame innovation, and the organisations involved in facilitating it are both large-scale for-profit and also not-for-profit. You do see, if you're involved, I actually work in the startup ecosystem, that actually in lots of ways these areas come through, and I would actually say it's mainly the policy area that is constrained by this tech box kind of framing of innovation. So that kind of approach opens up all the questions about what innovation is, how we understand it, who does it, and how it's done. How do we know when it's working, and what does it mean to be inclusive? And I've had to come from different trajectories in order to be able to ask those questions, because most of the policy settings I'm involved in, those questions are never raised at all. It's absolutely given that we know who the innovators are, we know how it happens, and we know the processes that would signal whether it's a success or not. If you have a slightly enlarged view of the ecosystem, those questions are not automatically answered. They need to be addressed contextually all the time. One of the things that I think feminist contributions have made, and why I'm saying that this is not just about women, I think it is about what feminist critiques can teach us, is that we need to look at the historical perspective and how certain constraints have actually been developed, and why they perpetuate. Because we all know about the issue of unconscious bias, and it's been referred to here. That's not so much the problem. The problem is because these things are so historically entrenched, that unconscious bias will just come back all the time. Now, we know it's very naturally human anyway for that to happen, but when you lay onto that historically entrenched and socio-culturally entrenched patterns of attitudes and behaviours, we're talking about a perpetual motion here, where yes, you can sweep them away, but they will come straight back again. So that makes it hugely challenging to actually affect long-term change. So these socio-historical perspectives, I think, are very important. I won't go through all of these things here, but the main thing I'm trying to point out is that there are a range of ways in which we need to understand how this constrains our understanding of what innovation is and how it can happen. And if we want to break down the barriers, that actually we have to address this perpetual motion I'm talking about of how unconscious bias will come in at every stage. And it makes it very challenging to achieve change. The socio-technical perspective, I think, is really important as well, because that's the contextual perspective in every sense. I was mentioning today to another colleague, one of the introductory speakers was saying how much we've lost out in the consumer sector, for instance, in terms of being a very fast-paced digital economy. And it was one of the ways we became a leader in digital economy originally. And if you look at the area of gender, you can see that most of us would just in a very obvious way say that women are people who have a huge amount of expertise in consumption in all sorts of multi-layered ways, and that may not really have been recognised in the innovation sector because of its gendered blind spots. I think that feminism offers us a lot of help in thinking about how we actually tackle some of these constraints. And again, I won't go through all of these areas, but some of you will know about the area of consciousness raising, which has been very, very powerful in changing women's lives. And it's very much about reflective, critical perspectives in which you actually explore things that enable the group to learn new things, but also the individuals involved to actually start thinking about their lives in different ways. And I think this is really important to do with innovation in terms of some of the questions that are being raised at this event. The other area that I work on a lot is the creative arts and design, particularly with very sort of technically STEM-oriented innovators, can actually open up their own understanding of what their innovation is about and who it can serve, what the ethical issues may be within it. And I actually work with startups. I'm now translating this into the research environment as well. I've just had a fellowship that I've worked on at Lancaster University looking at concepts of time and working with very high-level researchers using maker techniques to actually try to articulate how they're trying to investigate time. So it helps them to make it concrete by actually making little models and things. Very, very interesting. I've included here, and I assume these PowerPoints will be available to everyone, some examples. The one at the top is a state-of-the-art diversity startup tech project, but you'll see that's been sponsored by JP Morgan. I'm on the board of Capital Enterprise, so I've been able to watch the generation of that. They are the leading startup ecosystem provider in London. Very, very interesting. Bathtub to Boardrooms, one of the startup ecosystems that is focused on inclusion. And Social Enterprise Rwanda is a project I've just been involved in Rwanda, working with young British students, working with Rwandan students to produce social enterprise within Kigali. And I continue to be involved in different kinds of projects to kind of test these ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor. So there we had a different perspective a little bit. I think it's very interesting that not only talking about sort of what the challenges are, that we need to have the socioeconomic perspective as a socio-technical perspective, especially in terms of understanding the entire ecosystem as a whole and understanding really where the bottlenecks are so that we can have transformative change that is a bit more long-term. To round off, before we have a discussion, we're going to have a more of a practical end to the session's panel discussion, sort of speeches at least, and it's going to be more in the form of a case study. And our last speaker, but not least, is Teodora Rajchinova, and she is a digital policy consultant at the Hanover Communications. Please.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, you can hear me. Great. So, as Darko said, I'm going to present a more of a case study, and it's actually a case study of my home country, Bulgaria, and the case of women in technology in Bulgaria. We heard from Giovanni and from Mari about the cases in the US and also in general in the European Union and in other continents where we have the very big gap between involvement of women in technology. But I wanted to speak to you today about the case of Bulgaria because actually Bulgaria is one of the member states in the European Union that ranks first in female ICT specialists, in ICT students, and as well half of the people working in the tech sector are women. Just to show you some statistics, based on data from last year, you can see at the very end Bulgaria, with 22.6% of women being involved in ICT jobs and employment in the country, ranking highest in the Union. Another one showing, again, Bulgaria as with highest percentage of students studying in ICT courses. And when it comes to, in general, involvement of women in tech, Bulgaria ranks actually second, just after Lithuania, with around 0.5% of the women in the country involved in the tech sector, 44.6% in particular. Interesting to note is that also in the country there are more women scientists than men. There are 54% of women scientists, of the scientists are female, not male. And seeing all of this, you might wonder why so, how to get more women in the sector. And I will present some of my views and why it's so in my country. First, starting with education. We all know how important is education for getting young girls in STEM education and then in ICT professions. What happens in Bulgaria is that, first of all, we have a lot of schools and universities very much focused on mathematics, on information technology, etc. A practice that is not, let's say, approved by everyone, but I see it works in Bulgaria, is that we still have also gender quota in many of the schools where the equal number of female and male students get into classes. Interesting to see that is back in the days when I was applying to school, there were actually more women wanting to get in some of the ICT classes, and also in my class I was studying mathematics and physics rather than boys. Another reason why it's also the working conditions. Working conditions are very important for every person, but especially for women that want to have also children and they want to balance their careers. By working conditions, I mean flexible working hours, possibilities for teleworking, etc. What is interesting about Bulgaria is that, first of all, technology jobs are some of the highest paid in the country. We have women working in EU and US foreign tech companies in the country that are receiving 2-3 times more of the average salary. There is very often the possibility of teleworking and, as I said, flexible working hours, which makes it easier for women to have children and to balance their work and life. Another reason is role models, which is very important for me, and in general, it's one of, as Giovanni was saying, it's one of the reasons how we can get the most women involved in technology is to have these role models. By role models, I don't mean just a famous CEO, but also people in our everyday life, teachers, mothers. Interesting to notice that among my friends back home in Bulgaria, most of them have working mothers that are engineers, that are computer engineers, in agricultural engineers. So it's something quite normal for us to see a successful woman running a career, but also family. And last but not least is the entrepreneurship environment. It is very important to get to have more programs for involvement of women in entrepreneurship, because having a startup is a way of both including women in the work sector and also booming the economy of a country. The case of Bulgaria, we are not the best one when it comes to development of startups, but what you can do in Bulgaria is that you can open a company in just under 2 days with a budget of usually €1. The corporate tax and the policies towards entrepreneurs are very low. You can see 10% and 20% VAT, which are key to support a growing startup. To conclude, I don't think that but this is the best example ever, and I don't think that this is something that we should all look up to. But after all, it's a step, and it's a way to show that we can get more women in technology, and it's something very important in order to have a diverse and inclusive societies nowadays. Thank you.
Thank you. So these are the panel sessions, at least. I thought we'd go into a short discussion now, and I'm hoping that there will be, I know it's late, so either you ask questions or I make up a game that we have to play so everybody can wake up, so, or people are leaving already. So please, I'm going to sit over here, and there is a mic or 2 mics in the audience. And it would be nice if we can maybe kick off a discussion. Please.
Thank you, all of you. It has been really interesting. I'm wondering, what is your feeling about the use of quotas to improve? Oh, yes. And then that was...
Well, general feeling is, of course, people are not opposing it. In generally speaking, people are happy for what I have seen as a student. We were happy also to have the same number of boys and girls in the class, because often it will happen that in a class of, for example, in an ICT class, you have 29 boys and 2 girls that feel a bit marginalized. So generally speaking, I don't think we see quotas as a problem or as something that we should fight. I don't know if the other speakers have another perspective from their home countries.
I wish we didn't have to have quotas, is really what I would like to say. And there are some instances where quotas have worked, but again, there are problems with having quotas. I mean, we had very few women politicians in Ireland, and there was a lot of talk of introducing quotas, and it didn't really work. We have recently had the Minister for Education bring in a new idea, which is the glass ceiling in academia, because so few women have, reached the dizzy heights of being head of a university, that they've just announced that they're going to introduce 45 new professorships in Ireland that are only available to women. Now, I don't know how it's going to work, but I do think it's hugely problematic to introduce something like that, because if you're given one of those full professorships, well, what does it mean? You didn't really go in an open competition. So it's problematic. But I think in instances there are really good reasons to have quotas, where, the diversity and the gender balance is not just happening naturally, so that we have to do something strategic about it.
I think quotas are interesting, but I think we have to be careful not to formalize inequality that already exists. I was hoping that Gillian could talk a little bit about do you think that quotas can be seen as a barrier to long-term transformative change in ICT, for example?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that I'm going to say something a little bit provocative here. I've been privileged because of the kinds of work I've done all my life. I was a journalist first, and to be in a lot of environments where it's predominantly male and predominantly men are in control, and it's always surprised me how they don't realise how boring that is and how limited that is, and I'm being very serious about that now. As I said, because most of my life I've been in those environments. And whenever I've been in a more diverse environment, I've found it is so much more creative. And that's partly why I also use creative and design techniques in the kind of formal environments I'm in, because they stimulate people to think differently, even if they're the same in a way, yeah? They sort of disrupt them, yeah? So I think that I'm not sure whether quotas would solve that in a way, because it might help. I don't know. But I think what we need, is all of us to kind of wake up more and realise that actually the more diverse environments you have, the more creative they are, the more flexible they are, and that these monocultures, whatever they are, these kind of monocultures are they're not very productive.
Yeah, so maybe we can have quotas, just a suggestion, and really use sort of education with young people to really impact the value system, so that at some point we can phase them out. There is another question. I think it was one there and then one there, but if that's okay. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much to the panel and Loretta for coming together. It's very important. I'm very grateful that there's already been a couple of provocations coming from the panel, because perhaps what I will say will follow that lead or role models. This morning I was having a conversation about Indigenous futures. Last week I was at a UNDP event speaking on next generation governance. And one of the main people there talked about decolonising the future. Unfortunately, we haven't addressed this much today, and I'm wondering what any of you or any audience members think about the consciousness raising that has been brought up by the panel, the unconscious bias in innovation when it comes to racial as well as gender, able-bodied, class-based discrimination, and also what role does Europe, having been the leader in colonialism, have when it comes to decolonizing our innovation system? Thank you.
So, just to follow up, do you mean decolonizing the innovation system within Europe or more in terms of global development?
Well, one of the reasons I'm here in Europe is because I believe in the citizen-driven lead that European policymakers are stewarding. Europe is positioning itself very well when it comes to the global approach. So I think both. I think as the custodians of colonization, the responsibility that comes with that, but also being a global role model to where more inclusive innovation can go.
Can I start on this one very quickly? I work in this area with global development. So I think it's a twofold answer. When it comes to development outside of Europe, there is a more explicit sort of lessons learned approach that Europe has in terms of development aid and cooperation. And this has a lot to do with, for example, how the financing is structured, right, for development. So usually gender and bridging the gender gap is quite sort of an area that take precedence in most of the financing. If you look at all the multilateral funds in the World Bank that are for development, they include very specifically and explicitly issues such as bridging the gender gap, making women that are involved in different activities like fisheries or deforestation or agriculture to actually become visible, to get a formalized economic access and so forth. I think my colleagues here will have easier time answering the question for within Europe, if I understand it correctly, but I think here it's more of a normative issue, right? So it's a very structural way we look at discrimination where it's not explicit, but because of let's say a colonial historical experience that we've had, there is less inclusion and less diversity that's being allowed, which is normative and maybe not even done on purpose in many cases. But please, that was sort of my short input, I think.
I'll take the bait. Let's see. So in the web, this is where I work, in the web area, web standardization. We had a very interesting development. The internet and the web initially came very strong from actually a very strong Anglo-Saxon angle. And for many years, actually, even European languages were not well supported on the web. And so in one of my other home countries, or where I was born in Egypt, for example, where Arabic is the primary language there. You write from right to left, but the web would only support left to right. So you actually started having this Western language orientation of having the navigation on the left-hand side and so on, and how the web pages, websites were structured, until finally the web had the capability of actually making the navigation. But then people had already been used to having this wrong navigation. Basically, they were taught, so they would read a book from the right to the left, but actually websites, they would have the navigation code from the left to the right and so on. So this is, I think, another example where technology has been pushed. Developed here, and you just follow our footsteps, and you'll get there. In many cases, I mean, if I look at the famous Arab Spring and how social media was being used in Egypt, for example, to make this even a little bit more broadly, was very different than how social media was used here. So I think we need to step down. Decolonizing is one of the aspects. Step down from our perspective and recognize that there are other perspectives, other uses of technologies in ways that we didn't even perceive. And if we listen with a little bit, now I'll be provocative, with a little bit less arrogance, we can learn much more from each other across all borders. And even within Europe, you spoke about the aspects, sorry, I'm going on a bit longer, but this is touches a good nerve here, the indigenous aspects. And I was trying to allude to the fact that we forget intersectionality a lot when we look at diversity and inclusion. We become very specialized in our areas. We forget that there are women with disabilities, there are indigenous women with disabilities, there are indigenous women with disability with different sexual orientations. You know, all these are facets of human beings, and that we need to actually you know, take a broader look than trying to put people in categories.
Sorry?
I think we should make a call out to Europe to you know, make it a requirement of funding research and you know, in the new program, not just to consider gender, because I know gender is now very explicitly stated in the criteria, and if you didn't address the gender balance in your research proposal, that would certainly go against you. But I think we need to widen that more. I think we need to talk about you know, diversity across the board. You know, we need to address class, we need to address, you know, ethnic background, race, everything. And I think Europe, you know, is sort of a guiding light at the moment in terms of social justice. So I think it has the potential to develop that and really embed that in their funding system. So that I showed you that very little example that we did in Ireland, where, you know, we just went from gender obvious applications to gender neutral, and it really shifted the paradigm. And that was just a simple, small experiment. So I think let's make a call to the European Commission to widen their social responsibility.
Just to summarize that, I think this is really key because, again, the financing is the key to this, because people are, even though a lot of people that are educated might call themselves enlightened, as we heard before, a lot of things are invisible. There are entire social groups that are not visible at all. So even if people feel enlightened, we're not really having innovation that is completely inclusive or diverse, or, you know, reflects the diversity that exists in society. We had a question from the Commission actually now, please. No?
No. I'm Zoe Romano from Milan, Italy, a country where the 40% of girls from 25 to 29 is not studying, not working, and not looking for a job. So I was very impressed by Bulgaria presentation and the statistics that she showed us, but it came to my mind that the way you presented it was a bit like we are made like this. It was like a picture of what is the situation now, but I would be very interested to know what was the process to reach that, what was the battles, if there were, social, or what was the starting points in which you became like this. So are there some historical points or ways in which you arrived in this way, the way you are now?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think it depends on the different fields. For example, when it comes to education, yes, it was very much enrooted in the fact that we were a communist country before '89. So gender quotas, involving more women in science was something, let's say, normal during communism. All women had to work in any case. So I think this comes from these days and has actually stayed after the transition period and during the transition period. When it comes to working conditions, for example, this is something, again, that developed after, during the transition period, especially with investment in the country, women seeing that a lot of capital is invested in technology. We have a lot of tech companies having their basis in Bulgaria, first of all, because they find a bit cheaper labor, but also because they find talent. And because of these investments after the communism fell, I feel that women found kind of a way to where they can have better perspectives for a career and a job. So I would say it's a complex issue. It's not just about, of course, communism and politics. It's also about the mindset of people. I don't know why, but kind of in Bulgaria, it's seen quite sexy to work in ICT. It's not seen as something weird or that nerds should do. And by saying ICT, I don't just mean that all the girls that work in this field should be coders or programmers. I see myself as a girl in technology, and I don't know how to code. I work in digital policy. I work in policies related to data protection, to artificial intelligence, etc. So I think it's very important just to also how the image of women in technology is projected in a country.
And were they influenced by international trends, or do you think there was an influence from abroad?
Yes, for sure. Yeah. I don't think it just came bottom up all along.
But again, I think really about the... Stop working again. Okay, so I think it's again about the ecosystem quite a lot. It's not just about the sector. I think... Yeah. I mean, look at, for example, Spain or Italy, as you were saying, that it is the political side as well and the socioeconomic situation that is so difficult that people, I mean, students that are good are leaving and universities get less funding and then there is less capacity that's coming out of them, which affects the system, I guess. Any other questions?
If I can add just one thing about Italy, because it's my home country at the end. What I've seen, I left Italy when I was a young boy. So many years ago. And what I've seen is a shift in paradigm, culturally. I think we completely changed a lot of our values. And when I was a school kid, I had role models that are my teacher and so on, so on, so on. And just to put it in a joke way, if I go back home and the teacher is unhappy, my father is deeply unhappy. He would never dream or even think about going to the teacher and say, why you mistreat my child? And now in Italy, this is the common norm. And I think this is one of the many issues that actually affects our country, unfortunately. And I think those role models are fortunately being cherished and nourished in other countries in Europe.
Did we have another question over there?
Yeah, so
yes.
Thanks very much to the panel. I had a question about entrepreneurship and innovation. So I have been trying to set up a little startup for the last few years, applied to Innovate UK a few times. But what I've found is that the gatekeepers for larger scale investment, the VCs, the angels, it's an incredibly male-dominated world. And I found it very difficult to break into that for the larger scale investment. I wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Come to Stockholm. Loretta.
So a quick answer. So Loretta from the Commission. So at the request of the European Parliament, DG GROW created the network of female business angels. And they invited us in DG Connect because we had the platform the first platform for all of the women-led startups. So I think that, and that's a very new but starting. It's one of the major changes. Darko had also mentioned in the case of Sweden, which as he said is excellent, that when a profession like being a doctor goes predominantly male to predominantly female, over time, the pay goes down. So I think we come back to the issues that Marie mentioned at the beginning, which is to start first with the society we want, then the technology that allows us to create that. And also, I've been on panels in the Parliament, because the Parliament is really concerned about this. I'm very sorry the parliamentarian couldn't come at the last moment. We also had the biggest AI project in Sweden, somebody who won Women of the Year prize. The prize may be called Ada Lovelace in the future. She is now in New York getting funding for it, but she would have been with us today, so...
It's funny that she's in New York getting funding for it.
It's probably European funding that goes through New York. Okay.
I could respond to do with this project. As I said, capital enterprise is the main ecosystem investor driver. And part of how I got involved with there was that I'm very interested in the investors as part of the knowledge cycle of entrepreneurship, not just the money, because that's what I've witnessed in shadowing startups. And I think it would help us all to understand that better. So that's how I got involved with capital enterprise. But this one tech thing they have, that they've started, it took them a year to negotiate the corporate social responsibility money from JP Morgan. It's sponsored by JP Morgan, not the Europe, not commission or government or anything. It took them a year to navigate that. And what is interesting about it is that they've gone into it explicitly, as we all should with these things, for it to be sustainable in terms of actually being a transformative force, not wholly at first, but within the actual ecosystem of London, which, as many of you know, is highly diverse. And it's not just about women. It has gone in straight away as being very much about diversity. And I can see it already being a game changer. So and have a look at Capital Enterprise and their website. I mean, they get everything right. The logo is like a top logo. Everything is state of the art. And I think that's what we need. We need more projects like that. And they're run, as I said, they are the biggest ecosystem. They're the biggest accelerator. Look at their stats. It's all on their front page. And I know that they will help people. I mean, I want to be an angel, and I don't know how to be one. And I, it's how do you learn? Well, an environment like that is much more friendly. Bathtubs to boardroom has been going a while now, and that's again very diversity, but it has helped a lot of women. And I think it does go back to this thing about monocultures. I mean, even when I'm in collective sort of startup systems, not the individual ones I shadow, I find them very inviting and very friendly and everything, but you still feel quite marginal, and there's a lot of people there who know a lot. So I think we do need more environments where more diverse people, including women, can learn how you access that stuff. But I would really recommend Capital Enterprise. I'm incredibly impressed that they've done this project. It's really important that they've done it, and that, I think, will give it a lot of chance of success. But it's a real role model. But I think that thing of, how long it took them to negotiate, and the effort and focus they had to put into it, and it was because of a real commitment to diversity, and I think that's how these things happen. And I think policy could absolutely support this more in the examples like Loretta's given, to help create these environments where anyone feels welcome to go in and, well, how do you do this?
Thank you, that's great. I also think that we need to, I agree, and yes, but I think we also need to try and avoid to sort of play the game of diversity and inclusion when it doesn't cost anything. I think the doctor example that Loretta mentioned was interesting. Medical schools in Sweden are very open to having a diverse body of students, but once women started to be predominantly doctors, the pay started going down. So there was a huge scandal that actually admission officers were told by the administrators to try and admit less women. Which is so I think this is one, again, it's nothing to do with technology per se, but it has to do with the underlying social and political value system that we've got, which is basically the foundation for everything. So I think that because it's quite dangerous also to just talk about diversity in a specific sector and silo it, right? This should be something that is fundamental for everything that we do. And I think that while yes, in the short run, we need to look at places or ecosystems that can provide financing that are more diverse, I think that, again, the focus should be really on the social sort of foundation part. And very specifically, Norrsken Foundation in Sweden is something that you could have a look at, who specifically target sort of a diverse, or they're creating a very diverse ecosystem. Do we have any more questions over there? Yes. And please say who you are, where you come from also.
Yes, I'm Anneli Rosen. I'm coming from Estonia, from private sector, from a consultancy company called Civita. But I have a quite long background also in working for the government and for the universities. But I would just, first of all, I would like to thank you for very interesting insights to the topic. And I would like to share an experience, what I am dealing with at the moment, that I'm managing an Horizon 2020 project, which is actually trying to bridge ICT and social sciences and humanities. So that this is about breaking the silos, which was also a topic today in the panel session, that how to make ICT innovation inclusive. One way is that we should work in interdisciplinary groups, and that we should enhance this collaboration between different communities like ICT and social sciences who can really support. Well, support is actually not a correct term. We agreed yesterday during a workshop here in Vienna, but that social scientists and experts, they can give those necessary input on how to consider societal challenges and societal needs in ICT innovation. And during the workshop yesterday also I was really very happy. We had so good and concrete proposals from ICT sector that I think we will form as policy recommendations for the Commission also, that how to continue with this approach, that how to have positive messages and a positive plan for this collaboration after we have built the communities and have developed also together some project ideas, hopefully for the future. So that, we go on with this work and we implement also the principles of responsible research and innovation, where one of the dimensions is, of course, also gender, and there are many more. So that, just this perspective was what I wanted to add. So, but thank you very much.
That's interesting, I think, because we need... I think a baseline is important. So we need data, big data. We need to understand. I mean, everybody's in solution mode, right? Even with the Sustainable Development Goals, or every time we have something that we need to transform, everybody all of a sudden is in solution mode because they have sort of short-term market thinking. They want money, they want to have a solution that people will buy or use. But nobody really invests in the project finance, so to speak, or diagnosing the problem, right? This is not, I mean, what you're talking about, it's not, I don't think that that we need innovation to be diverse so that it could benefit society. We need to have, I think these are distinct. We have technological innovation that is applied in a certain way that can solve social issues or promote sustainable growth for everybody. And to have the idea of what we need to solve, we need the data again. So this is, I think, where ICT plays a big role, that we need to enable more and better data, I guess, for a baseline. What do you guys think? Who has more questions? One over there. And then I think was one. Yes, one on the front and then one on the back. Okay, then we'll do the other way around. We've got 8 minutes, so prepare your questions and we'll fire them. Why don't we do the questions in a row and then we'll take the answers.
Hi, this is Martin from Austria. I have been active in the field of assistive technology and technology for people with disabilities and elderly people now for around 20 years. And the last 12 years I was very much in the ambient assisted living domain. And I think when we're talking about diversities, needs for people with disabilities, I still wonder that this is not a knockout criterion for every proposal yet in the whole horizon, in the whole EU funding, if accessibility is not taken into the ground from the very beginning. If you look at AAL solutions, they completely forgot about the whole accessibility field. Yes, it is like that. If you look at the solutions, there's nothing in there. Maybe now with the public procurement, this is even a legal aspect. Where does public funding go? So I really request a big demand that request to bring into every proposal a section how to make really, how do you not only think about gender aspects, but really diversity? How do you take a certain target group into account? And how do you not only see ethically, but also ethics, diversity, and accessibility go very much together?
Thank you. Yes, again, I think financing is the way to make sure that things are included so it's more diverse. That's completely correct. I think we had a question here in the front.
Hi. Thank you so much. I think it's a really interesting question. Discussion. I do think it's a lot about women. I think the inclusiveness and diversity could be a bit wider looked at. But looking at my own question, I think it's similar. Looking around, I mostly see women in the room, so it looks like we're preaching to the choir. So how do we work on the rest of the population? Is it just policy and finance, or are there other ways that we can think about effective measures? I think what you just mentioned about data is something which we should have a little bit more of, which projects do work better. And if you look at the project, the people working on it, was it a really diverse group or not? So, for instance, the Cabinet of Canada, I heard, is amazingly diverse with gender, cultural background, people with disabilities. So can we somehow find data? What are your thoughts on how can we exploit the gains on diversity better?
Well, I think Canada is a role model, and particular their prime minister is a role model, and I think politics is the answer there, because he brought in these requirements and said, I have to have a very diverse cabinet. My ministries have to be across a huge, diverse range of backgrounds, and that's politics. I mean, politics. A lot of things come down to the politics, and currently our political systems have a very short-term view. Most political systems last about 4 years, and all the politicians think about is, how can I get in, for another 4 years when these 4 years are up, rather than looking at long-term change. They don't really have an interest in long-term change. They have an interest in, a very short-term cycle, which at the end of it, they want to be the benefit of it. Whatever good things they introduce, they want then to be re-elected on that. But in terms of addressing diversity, inclusion, gender, they have no interest, with one or two exceptions. Canada.
Well, I just want to support Marie's thing, saying that unfortunately we live in a world of politicians, a lot of them, but very few statesmen. Statesmen look 2 generations ahead, politicians look to the next cycle.
True. That's a very interesting comment. Shadi.
Right. So I think that's an excellent question that I think any group can be asking, how to strategically achieve inclusion. And I don't think there's one silver bullet or, one answer, but I definitely think that data is really important, particularly for groups that are so invisible, that are not known, I couldn't even answer you how many people with disabilities work at Google or, or these questions, right? To even start that discussion process, there just isn't the data. We just don't.
We have, in the Netherlands, we have 70 million people, of which 4 million are disabled in a digital way. And it's visibility, it's hearing, it's dyslexia, people who are not able to read at all. So it's a diverse group, but it's 4 million out of 17 million people in the Netherlands, so it's huge.
But how many of those are in IT, and what positions do they have in IT, and so on?
I keep finding them more and more. I work at an agency that does e-government, so I try to look at them and find them and get them to work for me in order to make e-government systems that actually work for everyone. But if I look at my own board, there's not much diversity there.
Anyway, what I'm trying to say is I'm not aware of data that is being collected on a consistent way to actually make these discussions happen. Eurostat, for example, collects very little data, sometimes with census, depends on country to country, but there isn't really this data collection in order to actually start the discussion, say, here's where we have a gap, here we have issues. With women, I'm not even going to use the word gender, with women, I think it's more advanced. I think we do have more data, we have a bit more information on this. But when it comes to other groups or other aspects of society, I think we definitely have way less data. And I do think this is a good starting point, or one of the many points that we need to have.
It's true. I think those are interesting comments, but I also think that data doesn't really exist in a vacuum. I mean, it doesn't really matter if you have the data if you can't have anybody that's going to prioritize something. So I think it's quite important. I mean,
could I just add something about education there? Because I mean, I think it's also about what we use the web for, and that's I'm as interested in that there are lots and lots of people using the web and who are quite, but they're not necessarily using it to empower themselves. So I think an empowerment register, whoever it is as important as anything, because the web is an incredibly empowering tool. And if you're looking at a lot of younger generations, they use it in very, very specific ways, which we need research on this really, which they do see as empowering, but it's not empowering in the way that I'm thinking of it, in terms of wide lifetime opportunities, wide opportunities for different socioeconomic levels to maybe learn things for free and then enter higher up the scale. So if you look at the area, there are illustrations of it. If you look in the music industry, at how, because that's something young people are very good at and familiar with, there are very new business models, which mean people can enter it much lower down the scale and then come in at another level, which are good examples of what could happen. But there's a lot more possibility across a range of opportunities in life that the web opens up. So I think that area is really important, and actually not that much research is done on it. And in terms of education, there's not a lot of emphasis on empowering yourself through the web. So we've had reference to digital skills here, but again, I think we need a lot more debate about what do we mean by digital skills, and if we're really pushing this line about Europe being the democratic and the ethical sort of push of AI and everything, then again, that's a whole area that really needs opening out, I think.
This is a very complex issue, I think. It's so all of these things are really a mixture, because we don't really, a lot of people, young people, don't even know what reality looks like. We've got so many sort of alternative facts coming in. People don't really know whether they will need digital skills or not. Is AI going to replace jobs? What are the jobs of the future going to look like? We don't know. Everybody's kind of flying blind. We do know maybe, but most people that need to get educated or empowered don't, I think. And I also think, for example, millennials, the way they look at diversity and inclusion, McKinsey, together with Deloitte, did a huge study about this in the tech sector. And it's not. Actually, millennials don't think in terms of gender, or they might think in terms of sexual orientation, but not in terms of gender or color or something like this. They think in terms of how well the person gets integrated in their team, or, so it's completely different, which makes this even a larger challenge, because these sort of definitions of the problem disappear with young people, because it's hype now, not to think about color or not to think about something else, which further really makes this, or enables this inequality, I think. And this is why I think that we need yes, education is important, and yes, we need politics, but I really think that we need a sort of a social movement, really, of young people, which I think are key, because look at, for example, plastics. Governments try to legislate about this for decades, and all of a sudden in the last year plastics has become this huge thing. Why? Because it was a social movement, right? Look at the Me Too movement. There are different debates about it, but again, it did something. So I think African American empowerment, we have all these huge social changes that have happened, that have been at a later stage supported by policy because politicians dared to legislate. But it was really a bottom-up, sort of empowered, enlightened, I think, way. So how we do that, especially with kids today that don't really, have the attention span of like 3 seconds, I don't know. But it's I think, something to think about, really. All right, so we're out of time. I was going to ask one last question to the panel, and this is about the added value of diversity and inclusion in ICT. So if anybody wants to take this on, that'd be great. If not, we understand it's too late, and then we can just sort of 30-second answers.
It's a 30-second answer. I lead a research group. If the research group is not diverse by any mean of this, it's like you only see one direction, and you always go in that direction. At the moment you start bringing people from other areas, different gender, different ethnicity, different cultures, then you start looking at 360 degrees. That changes completely the way you do things. Completely.
Mari.
I think diversity adds a huge amount to anything, to any project, or any innovative idea, because we are now designing things, technology and all kinds of things, in a very different way than we were 10 or 20 years ago. Before, when I was an engineer a long time ago, we never consulted our audience. We never thought about any of these issues. We simply sat down in a room and said, we're going to build this now because that's what people want. That has radically changed. If you don't use user-centered design methodologies like design thinking or, what's commonplace now, you run the risk of developing or coming up with a new technology that nobody wants.
Thank you. Gillian? Pass?
No, well, I'll just say diversity rocks. I mean, that's what, I've spent my life seeking out diverse environments of different kinds and being the sort of person with their nose up against the window. I think that, monocultures are very narrow and they're not very creative and productive.
Yeah, along these lines, I think the added value of diversity is innovation, particularly in accessibility. Again, just this user-centered design, this idea of, we even say provocatively, when you're testing a system, just test with people with disabilities. If you test with the fringes, you get the rest for free. Don't bother with the non-disabled people. Just test with people with disabilities. If that works, it works for everybody. So innovation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I totally agree. For me, adding diversity is basically avoiding future bias and in any future technology that is being developed, be it artificial intelligence or any other emerging technology.
Thank you. I'm slightly worried that nobody mentioned the word sustainability or making money, but let's hope that that's going to change. We'll probably need another discussion. Thank you so much for coming. Apologies for the late hour.